Tay, you're muted.
Typical, right? Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Right. Okay, let's get started. Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on the session on bringing Dataverse to Excel using Office add-ins. Before I get started, I would like to first thank all the sponsors and the organizers for this event. We all know that this cannot happen without them. So thank you for your support and hard work and for organizing this great event. So if anybody wants to applaud with virtual clap, you can do it here. It's great. Okay, I'm just gonna move on. Right. Just a quick intro for those who don't know me. My name is Terim Han, but you can call me Tay. For it is actually 5 o'clock in the afternoon, down under in lovely Sydney, Australia. It's actually getting pretty dark outside. I work as a Dynamics 365 application specialist at Blackmores, and I'm a newly awarded MVP as of this month. Um, you can find out what I'm currently working on my blog and get in contact with me on my LinkedIn or Twitter. So yeah, that's about me. And so let's get this show rolling. Cool. We have quite a full agenda today. Not sure if I'm getting too ambitious, but let's try to cover off these high-level points in this session. To start off, we need to talk about the motivation behind this, and like the motivation as to why we want to bring Dataverse to Excel. And this point is going to be followed by the brief explanation of the inner workings of the Office add-ins. And then I will show you all the tools and things that we need as developers to get started with Office add-in development and things we need for implementing our Dataverse scenario as well. Then we will talk a little bit about the security and the Office add-in runtime, as that is very important. And hopefully, I prayed enough for the demos to work, or at least we will see some code of the demos I have prepared. So fingers crossed. And after that, we'll wrap up with a few comments about testing, debugging, publishing, and some of the troubleshooting and gotchas. All right. Motivation. Why we do what we do, right? Sometimes we just do because it's fun, right? But I think we have a pretty solid reason for this one. Okay, I'm sure there is not a single person in this virtual room that hasn't worked with Excel. If there is, where have you been, right? Just kidding, and also not kidding. We might really love Excel or hate it, but we all know that Excel is one of the favorite tools that the users love to use for their work. On the other side of the fence, IT might cringe at this notion for some of these valid reasons. Like number one, the users are working in silo, the data getting is duplicated and shared without governance. Number two, sometimes the data is kept hosted in these Excels and becomes stagnant without an easy way for us to access or search for them. And number three, instead of working in the system that is specifically built for purpose, they sometimes prefer to export that data, use it in Excel, and then maybe or maybe not put the data back to the source system, which may result in nightmares of double entering with errors of incorrect data being entered and what have you. So who has experienced this? I'm sure there's a lot of you guys. So why does this happen? Okay, maybe it's because that, let's face it, Excel is an excellent tool and it's much easier and more powerful tool to do certain jobs for what it needs to do. Like for example, finance, the complexity and the variance of the rules are much logical to manage in Excel than to replicate in other systems. Whatever the reason is, we want to aid the users and the business to have the best experience of using both Excel and their business systems. So in our case, that business system will be Power Platform and Dataverse. There are a few ways to interact with data in Excel using Power Platform, notably the Power BI, the Power Alternate Flows with connectors, and Canvas apps, and etc. But in order to make that experience even more seamless and explore more dynamic ways to interact with Dataverse data, all from within working space of the Excel, we need to start exploring solutions like Office add-ins. So that is the motivation for this session, and that's what we are going to discuss now. So what are Office add-ins? If you have worked with any of the Office applications like Word, Excel, Outlook, we're all already very familiar with the concept of add-ins. And probably one of the most notable one for this crowd would be Dynamics 365 app for Outlook. This provides the ability to track emails to Dynamics 365 right from your Outlook via add-ins. So in a nutshell, Office add-ins are simply websites embedded in Office applications. And its platform allows us to build solutions that can interact with the contents of the Office documents as well as external data like Microsoft Graph and Dataverse. And for those who love front-end development, yes, you lovely PCF community, Office add-ins are implemented using standard web technologies like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So you can basically implement anything that runs inside a web page in your Office add-in. Great, right? So unlike the days when COM and VSTO add-ins were implemented, which could only run on Office on Windows, these are what we call web add-ins, which can run across platform, as the execution of the add-ins are sandboxed within the context of the browser. So no code will be run directly on the user's device. To bring Office add-ins to life, there are two ingredients. One is manifest. The second one is web application. So manifest is just an XML file. This defines the settings and the capabilities of the add-in. So it contains various metadata like the ID, the display name, the version, which client this add-in is for. It dictates how this add-in will extend and interact with the Office client, whether that is through custom ribbons or task panes, etc. So when add-ins are loaded, the Office application will literally read the manifest file to hook up and render the client's UI accordingly. So web application, as we have discussed, provides the UI and the functionality of the add-in components, and it uses Office JavaScript APIs to interact with Office client and the content of the Office documents. So that brings us to the next slide, where we will cover the Office JavaScript APIs. So there are two distinct flavors here that when it comes to Office JavaScript APIs. One is the common API. This is for the common functionalities and the object models that are shared across all Office applications. This gives you access to UI, the dialogues, and the Office client settings. It exposes context object, which gives access to runtime environments after the initialization of the add-ins. And from it, you can obtain document object to interact with to gain access to the content of the Excel worksheets, Word documents, etc. And then there's this application-specific API, as name suggests, provides objects and that are native to the specific Office application. This is available for Excel, Word, and OneNote only at the moment, And in our case, we'll be using the Excel JavaScript API that exposes the strongly typed objects for worksheets, ranges, tables, and charts, and etc. Lastly, there is a concept of API requirements set, which determines whether a group of API members can run on a specific version and the platform of the Office application. Right, so how do we get started? Here is a list of prerequisites for Office add-in development on the left. First, you choose the language of your choice. It can be either JavaScript or TypeScript, whatever you feel most comfortable in. You need to install these set of tools if you haven't got them already. So you want the latest version of Node.js and NPM. And the one that I want to highlight is the Yeoman and the Yeoman generator for Office add-ins. This is NPM package that will scaffold Node.js projects for Office add-in development. You will need your favorite IDE, and that's for me, Visual Studio Code for any front-end development. Microsoft 365 account with Office subscription. You might want to have the Office clients installed on your desktop. If you're developing on Windows, I suggest Microsoft Edge and Microsoft Edge DevTools, which you can get through the Microsoft Store. And if you want to learn more about the Office add-in development, after this session, I found Script Lab developed by Microsoft, which is also an Office add-in in itself, extremely useful to understand the usage of APIs. And the Microsoft official documents are so well written, and they have complementary Microsoft Learn modules you can take as well. Right, on the Microsoft Dataverse side, as our mission is to bring Dataverse to Excel, so we need Microsoft Power Apps Dataverse instance, and we need also Azure tenant to register an application with Azure Active Directory. This is to allow our users to connect to Microsoft Dataverse environment from an external client application, in our case, the Office add-ins, using OAuth authentication. We need to register this app registration in our Dataverse instance as an application user. And most importantly, bring your sense of fun and imagination, because anything is possible to build in this space. We'll cover some of these again and see them in action before starting the demos. But before that, I promise only one more serious slide before the demos. And you have guessed it. There is, it had to be about the security, right? Also, it is very good to understand the inner workings of the platform as it explains why we do certain things. The Office add-in runtime manages the lifecycle and the interaction between the add-in and the client application. It also secures the add-in with set of permission rules and performance governors. This is in order to enforce certain amount of restraints and restriction on what it can access on the client and how it is isolated so that the process does not affect the user's environment in any way. Depending on which platform the Office application is on, so whether if that's on your Windows machine, Mac, or on the web, the add-in web page will be hosted differently. So on Windows device, the add-in web page is hosted inside Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge Control, which in turn is hosted inside add-in runtime process. But on OS X, this will be sandboxed WebKit runtime host. What is different is the Office web client, where the Office add-ins are hosted in an iframe using the HTML5 sandbox HBuild. So this is where things get quite tricky when your add-ins have the requirements to explicitly call an identity authority, like the Microsoft Identity Platform, to authenticate the users. Almost all of these identity providers prevent their login pages from opening in an iframe due to security reasons. And this is why Office Dialog API comes to rescue. It provides a non-modal dialog box, which spins up a completely separate browser instance from the host page, and it has its own JavaScript runtime environment and window object, and no shared execution context or session storage with the host, and only allow downstream interactions with the host page is to send back message from the dialog using the message page method and the handling of the events. I think that is enough for slides for now. Let's see some of these things in action. So, first demo. It's written with the intention to help users to easily save their data in Excel to Dataverse as they are working with it. This table mapper add-in allows users to map any of the tables that you have defined on the active worksheet to one of the tables in Dataverse using Dataverse API. This removes the hassle of preparing a separate import file to import data through the data management section of the Power Apps or Dynamics 365 instance. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, can you see the screen? Can somebody confirm, please?
We can see your screen.
Awesome, that's great. All right, before we get any further, let me show some of those things that I mentioned on the slide, how to get started. So the first thing that I want to show you is the Script Lab add-in, which you can actually get it from this Insert tab and go Get Add-ins. And in here, you have the store, which will load up with the Script Lab, and you can add it and install it. I have already installed this, so I don't need to add it again. And I can actually see that has installed because I get the Script Lab tab on my client. So here I can open up the code, which will open up a task pane. And once that loads, let me drag it open a little bit more. There is this hamburger menu, and there are some options here. Here are some snippets that I've already kind of played with. And then there's loads of examples here. And literally, this is so helpful. And so here, if I want to learn more about how tables are created using the Excel JavaScript API, I simply just search for that. And then if I go to tables and I open this particular snippet out, this actually shows you all the things that you could do using the Excel JavaScript API. And I'm just going to load the run so that we can actually see side by side of the actual host page. So if in here, I can go and say create table, and then it will go and create the table, add rows, add column, calculated columns, and anything that you do in the scripts thing, like you actually get reflected when you're actually executing it through this task pane. So it's a very exploratory and experimental sandbox that you could use quite well to learn all this. So that's great. So the second thing that I wanted to show you was the Microsoft Edge DevTools. And here you can actually see that I can attach to it will actually recognize the add-in processes. I can actually attach to one of these processes and then start inspecting it and debugging it and all that kind of stuff. So later on, when I'm actually developing my own add-ins, I can actually be able to see it here. And then the third one that I wanted to show you was, let's say, go to my PowerShell prompt. And this is to do with the NPM packages, right? So if I've got NPM package that I was telling you about, the yo, that's yeoman, and then we want to get the generator office, that's the scaffolding for the projects projects for the Office add-ins. I won't install it here, but this is what you will actually have to get. And once I have got this installed, oh, sorry, there's somebody saying, please zoom your screen. How should I zoom my screen? Can you, okay, how much? I'm not sure if there's a, is that big enough? Okay, I'm gonna go with this. So here I go your Office, and then essentially this is gonna give me a whole bunch of options for the project type for the add-ins that I want to scaffold. Oh, Control Plus, thank you. And then so I've got these options. So for my examples, I want to use the Office add-ins task pane project using React framework and Excel custom functions add-in projects for the second demo that I have. So let's just go with the React one, and then I can choose the TypeScript as my language, call it whatever you want, and then I'm going to choose Excel. So here, I'm not going to create one because I already got one created. Don't want to waste your time sitting through an npm install. And so I'm just going to pop one open, which I've got going here. So I'm assuming I need to, can you see this properly, or should I increase font in this one as well? Okay, is that better? Okay, so here you can see the manifest file that I was talking about before. And so this actually contains the definition for the properties and functionalities for this particular add-in. And so this is the task as task pane. So you can see that this is where the source location for the task pane is going to be served from. And then you have all these like metadata that you want to inject in for creating the custom ribbon button on the client. And here we have the task pane, with the taskpane.html. That's the web page that we're going to host within the task pane. And then the one that I want to highlight for you is the Office JavaScript API, which gets served at the moment from the CDN on Microsoft Network somewhere. And then the index TSX, which is the entry point. And the one I want to highlight again is this Office initialize. And this is just so that we only render our app components once the Office has fully initialized what it needs to do. So, okay, this is all great. So I'm just going to close this vanilla one, and then I'm going to open the one that I have prepared for this particular demo. So the screen that you see here is actually very familiar because I use the same scaffolding tool. And here I have my manifest. Again, I'm also loading up a task pane for this one. And my particular button is going to be called Dataverse Table Mapper, and is grouped in the Dataverse group commands group. And here I've got something different, some more files that will actually help me to do the login and authentication process for the task pane later, which I'll show you. And so I'm going to npm start this. I actually got a so this will actually start off a local dev server. And I actually got one started already, only because it takes quite a long time for this to bundle up. And just gonna wait for, because this npm start actually also side loads the task pane into the Excel as well. So here you can see that I have this table mapper button. And then if I open this up, I have this table mapper add-in. So here, as you can see, it's very familiar. I'm using Fluent UI controls for building up my UI, so it looks quite natural within the Office client. And so I'm just going to now go back to, yeah, okay. Now I'm going to go and form a user scenario. So I have a products workbook that I was working with. And in here, I'm a user who maintains this product list through Excel. So I'm just gonna make a copy of this, right? And then I'm just going to drag this over here so I can use it in my active Excel sheet. Gonna close this until I need it later. And so I might be a user, I love Excel, and I've got heaps of these things on the, active worksheets. And all of these tables, they are given a unique name. So this is kind of randomized, but they all have their own unique names here. So if I was to actually go back to my task pane and come here, let me get some more real estate on this. And then if I refresh this button here, and this will actually load all the tables that I have configured on this sheet. That's great, right? So now I'm just going to go back to the code just to show you how this is actually done. So I'm going to start off with the app TSX component because that's where all my components starts from. At the moment, I have configured app provider and auth provider. Those are two React context APIs. So the first one is app context, where the context provider shares the Dataverse helper instance as a prop. And then there's the second one, which is the auth context, where the context provider exposes a Office auth states using custom hook. So if I was to go to the implementation, you can see that I'm actually loading in the use Office auth, which is a custom hook, which I will show you the details of this later as well. So for the actual rendering of or calling the Excel JavaScript API, the control that does that is this table filter. So at the moment, I've got a button that on click will go and get an Excel table. I have made an Excel helper, and in there I have this method called get table names. And as you can see, I'm accessing the Excel JavaScript API, which actually brings back the context of the client, and then it goes and accesses the context to retrieve the workbook. And through workbook, we can retrieve like strongly typed objects such as the worksheets and tables and so on. And something you need to remember here is that these objects are actually proxy objects. What I mean by that is that you literally have to load the properties that you want to get the data for before you can actually start using it. So in order to do that, you load it. Like, for example, I wanted the table name. So I load it, and then I'll go and say context.sync, and that will go and get the data. And once that's done, I can iterate the items that I got back and then load it. And that's what you saw in that drop-down list. Okay, so this is like some of the Excel JavaScript APIs that I'm using here. So I'm just going to go over to Dataverse side. So here I have products table that I have configured. And here I've got several columns that I configured as well. And in order to authenticate the users from the add-in and to call the Dataverse API, we must first register an app in the app registration through Azure portal. Okay. So I've got register and so I've got Dataverse Excel demo, which is essentially a app registration that I've already created for this. But because I want to show you what are some of the values that I have entered in for creating one of these app registration, I can call it whatever I want for this one because it's just to show you what I've done. I'm going to check the accounts in any organization directory. And for the redirect URI, I want to select the single page application. And in here, for the redirect URI path, I want to serve up from my localhost my login page. I hit register, you'll come to this, right? And so here you want to note down the client ID. And then in the authentication, you can see that whatever entered in that first screen is populated here for the redirect URI. And it specifies that the ground type for this is going to be using the authorization code flow with PKCE. I have a blog post about this authentication type using Azure MSO React NPM package if you want to know about it. So check it out. Jot down the client ID, and then we want to navigate to API permissions. I already have got this API permission for Dynamics CRM loaded, but in order for you to get there, you go add a permission, you go Dynamics CRM, it will be a delegated permission, and then you check the user impersonation and then add permissions. So that's all you actually have to do in terms of setting up the app registration. And so now you go back to the advanced settings and the Dataverse, Power App, sorry. And then in your security users, you want to create an application user, and which I have already done. So when you actually create new, all you have to do is copy and paste the application ID that you got from the registration. Here, the client ID, to here. And then once you save it, and you can actually assign more user roles to this particular application user, but it's not necessary because we're purely going to use the permissions of the user to access the data. So, and also in the API permissions, I actually didn't grant admin consent because I purely wanted the users to grant consent when they start using the add-ins themselves. Cool. All right, so let's see how this all fits into place, right? So let me go back to my add-in, and here, let's say I've got my, so let me sign in. And when I click on the sign in button, this will pop open the login.html page using the Office Dialog API method that I mentioned earlier. And this will first load the login HTML page in the same domain as the task pane in order for this to work. And then, as you can see, this has redirected my login page to the identity provider's login page to authenticate the user. And then when you click on the account, you can retrieve back the access token for the user. So now I'm signed in. Let me see. Let us quickly go to the code to see what it actually just happened. So in my login component, I've got a custom hook where I'm getting all the actions for the login and logout and the auth state and all that stuff that I can hook into some of the controls that I have in this component. And so if I was to go to auth, use auth, which is just a wrapper for the use Office auth. So here I've got the login and I've got the logout. And here, if I was to go even deeper and to sign in, here you see the Office Dialog API, where I actually get that information through the context UI and display the dialog pointing to the login.html page with a callback function to call back after you have done whatever you need to do in your login page. And then, so from there, I'll go to the login section. So this is the HTML page and there's the code behind it. As you can see, that we are using Microsoft Authentication Library to acquire the user access token here. You can see the client ID that we have acquired in our previous steps. And then here you recognize the redirect URI. And the scope that for the login request is going to be my sandbox URI for the Dynamics instance with the user impersonation as the scope. So once the authentication process is successful, it will use the message parent method to pass the token back to the task pane. So remember when I said the dialog and the task pane does not share the same JavaScript runtime context. So this is why we actually have to do it this way. The dialog will raise an event which will tell the task pane that something happened. So that is actually within the callback that we had. So here, when the dialogues are actually instantiated, we also append some event handlers which will listen out for some of these events that happen. So in the success story, we will get a event type of dialog message received and a message which will contain the access token. And once you got that, you can save it against your auth state, your local storage, or whatever you want to store it. And then now we have a token we can call the Dataverse API with. So let's go back to the task pane. And then here, actually, before that, let me just go back. Just the logic behind the Dataverse calling. So this is the Dataverse API that I'm calling with the access token, and I'm querying for the entity definitions. And later on, I'll be querying for the entity attributes as well. And then if I go to the example here, now I can see all the entities loaded in my dropdown and the product entity that I've configured. And now, for the sake of the exercise, I'm just gonna go and meddle with some of these headers that we have on the table and maybe give it a different name, awesome one or something. And then come here and refresh. You can see that awesome one reflected here. And then once you select, the table is going to be selected, and that's using the Excel JavaScript API. And then in here, as you can see, I'm using the table header as the column name. And then now I can easily go and say, okay, for this description, I want to map it to description 2, which is this particular column. And then the profit, gross profit, net sales. Let me just go through this list. I think somebody's mic is on. Inventory, date, and name, and net sales, and product code. Okay, and then it says that there's 8 columns mapped, and if I was to go and map rows to Dataverse, it will say success table rows has been mapped. And so I need to go back to here to show you what actually happened. And here you go. So that's like what has been mapped. So you can actually see that there's quite a lot of potential here using Office add-ins along with Dataverse API to do CRUD operations straight from the user's workspace, right? So this example that I have here is really simpleton. And so there's a lot of whistles and bells that still needs to be added, but it gets through the idea, right? So let me go and I'm just gonna do a bit of tidy up before I can show you the next demo. Just bear with me. Close all the Excel sheets that I have open, and the Node server I want to get rid of as well. And this is our Office cache. I'm going to get rid of that. Delete. Cool. And then just gonna, while I'm talking, I'm just gonna start off this Node server as well. Hold on, this usually hogs the process for me to go back to the slides. Oh, no, it did work actually. That's cool. Okay, cool. Demo 2. Okay. While that's happening, to extend on that further, my second demo, I want to showcase what we can do with Dataverse API through custom functions. So custom functions allows us to add new functions to Excel, like the sum or the average, by defining functions in JavaScript to be deployed as part of your task add-in. consider that we have task pane, just like we did with the demo one. We want to share the token acquired we want to share the token acquired within our custom function. This is where the shared runtime comes to play. Let me get rid of this one. And so this will allow sharing of data between the custom function and the task pane, and which essentially means that we need to configure the Office add-ins to run all its code in a single shared JavaScript runtime. We can do this configuration through the manifest, and I'll show you how. So if I was to go back to code, all right. So in the manifest for demo 2, just gonna, hold on. I think there was an error loading up. Just gonna npm start this again. Oh no, it is loaded. Oh. Sorry, bear with me. Okay, okay, I'm just gonna go with this one just to kick things off. Okay, cool. All right, cool. Back to manifest. So the important fact about the manifest is that we can configure the shared runtime, right? So when I come in here, because this is now for the custom function, since some of the reference that you have in the manifest file is different, like for example, the definition for the custom function runtime here, and also the extension points for the custom function, and we also specify the namespace that we want to use for the function as well here. But the important thing here I have to point out is the page source at which where the functions are loaded from. So we're actually pointing to the task pane instead of its own function URL. So in the source, and if I go to functions and go to functions.ts, I have defined on the Windows a shared state. And in here, I also have defined few custom functions. And what I want to point out in this comment are these special annotations that actually tells the project that these functions, these JavaScript functions are going to be custom functions. So currently that defines the name that you will see in the Excel later, and then you can specify what parameters that you want to pass through for this particular custom function and what value that you want to get back from it. So I've got one for storing value, I got one for get value, and I've got one for get SKU, which I'll come back to. And so if I was to come back to this particular Excel file, and if I go and looks quite familiar with the login here, and I sign in as myself, this is the token that is acquired. And then if I was to go and store the token and then come here and I go, what was the namespace I defined, which is shared state, right? So here I go get value. That on click actually goes and sets the value for this particular global state. So in our Dataverse environment that we have these SKUs and we got 3 of them. And so what in our code have defined is that we want to get SKUs and we want to return a dynamic array with rows of SKUs. And here, since we have in the shared state the access token, and we are now can call the Dataverse API, we can grab the result and then build up our array of results and then pass it back to the Excel. And we'll see the result of this here. So there you go. So in the case if you want to quickly access something from Excel sheet, and this is quite good too, because now if you want to work with some of the values that you might have, you can go and specify that, and then you can use it. So yeah, so that's the demo for this. And yeah, so just a few points before wrapping up. Test and debug, vein of every developer's life. And as if you've seen from my demo, the Yeoman generator for Office add-in will have it configured that the add-ins are automatically side-loaded when you go npm start. But you can do this manually if you want, and you can use the shared folder catalog for that. For debugging purposes, my PC won't play nicely, so I couldn't demonstrate this, but there is an extension in Visual Studio Code, Microsoft Office Add-ins Debugger extension, that actually works really good on my Mac, so trust me, it does work. So you can install that if you want to go down and develop one of these add-ins. Or the alternative, which I've already shown you, is the Microsoft Edge Dev tool, which kind of gives you the same developer experience that you might get from a browser dev tool, right? So two gotchas. One is always validate your Office add-in manifest. This got me because obviously I've done something wrong, and then my add-in won't load, and I forgot to validate it. And so that that scaffolding, it actually comes with a script where you can run an npm run validate, and they will go off and validate your schema for the manifest file. And if there's something wrong, it will tell you what is wrong. And the second one that you saw me do already between demos is to clear the Office cache. That is quite important, especially when you're modifying the manifest and you've got a bunch of these. I mean, even just working with one add-in, if you change the manifest, it might get sticky. So you might actually want to go and clear that out between testing your application. And lastly, to publish this, once you have done developing, you can publish it through centralized deployment through Microsoft 365 Admin Center if you want to just publish it within your organization. Or you can, if you want to deploy publicly, then you can always put it up in the Microsoft App Stores by setting up a developer's account, and you can submit the add-in solutions through Partner Center and then send it for some approval process. So yeah, that is it. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me or DM me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Hope you enjoyed the session and hopefully you found it useful. Yeah, enjoy the rest of the session on the bootcamp.
Excellent. Thank you, Tay. A lot of magic there. I see a question in the chat. It's about the content for the login HTML will never display to the user. So it's just to start the identity provider login dialog and to listen to the message.
Sorry,
from token.
so the content yeah, so no, it didn't display to the user. So it just literally using the MCell like npm package that we're using, it redirected the login HTML page to the provider's login. And then it sort of like, it works like a proxy in between. So if you do want to display something in that, it's fine. But the whole purpose is for you to just go and log in. So yeah.
Thanks. Thank you.
Oh.
I don't see further questions for now. I must say I have respect for that much going deep in that API. How long did you took to deep dive there?
Oh, it's a bit of a rush job actually. You know about this, Diana, because I was thinking about it. So yeah, no, the API, I mean the actual Office development, we're doing some POC for Blackmores, so so it is definitely a potential there. And for this particular session that I was preparing, I'm already very familiar with building out like PCF control, so yeah, so it's the same technique that you would use for building out PCF control because it's all web technology, right? So you can reuse that knowledge that you have to build out the Office add-ins. So yeah, yeah.
So it's not something you just can make it parallel to the rest of the task you do in the daily work. I guess it's a lot of stuff to study first. I see another question. Does this Excel add-in respect Dataverse security? So if normal user does not have the product records, so the rights, how does it work?
Yeah, so it will because you're logging in as the user, right? You're essentially just giving the app registration the authority to actually go and access the data on behalf of the user, right? So actually, there is something that I haven't tried, which I was trying to get it working for this demo, was the SSO for the single sign-on for Dataverse. So I know that there is a template for Graph API, and that works really beautifully. And so I'm going to tackle that with Dataverse as well. So I'm going to blog about all of this in my blog. In the coming weeks. So if you want more information regarding that, do reach out for that and just keep your eyes on that.
Cool.
Cool.
I really look forward to your next blog.
It's a bit different. Anyways, thank you so much for having me and enjoy, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Cool.
So I'm gonna stop the recording.